Hello, Flamps and Flim Florps. I'm Solid Steak, and I'm going to complain about controllers. The last complaining video I did, which was on box art, actually more than 2 people watched it, which I kind of wasn't expecting. So I figured I'd do another one since school hasn't really given me the time to do the proper reviews, which should be coming back out again. I'm just in exam period right now, so during the summer I can get those out. But for now, I'm gonna whine and complain. If you like these stuff, I can even continue doing more of them. They're super easy for me to do. But let's start out with some controllers. I picked out these 3. Oh, I should just say, I'm going to be going over just about every controller worth talking about in my collection, so. But let's start off with these 3. These are sort of what I'm going to call standard controllers. They kind of have the standard button and stick layout that has sort of become the norm in the last few console generations. This is the PlayStation 4, Xbox 360, and Switch Pro controller, respectively. And you can see some similarities with them. Mainly the 4 face buttons on each controller, the 2 analog sticks, a D-pad, start, select, and home buttons, or on the newer controllers, share, screenshot buttons as well, are all common. And then the 4 shoulder buttons on the back, nothing going on the bottom. And controllers have kind of converged into this design because it works. You have easy access to everything, and it's generally comfortable. Provides you a means of movement, camera, various functions all at one time. But there are... So these are what I would call good controllers. That's subjective, but I don't think I would be hard pressed to find somebody who would disagree that these controllers, or any controller with this sort of standard layout, even if you have some minor gripes with it, I'd be hard pressed to find somebody who would say they're bad. Going as far back to like the PS2, original Xbox, had similar designs to this. They're all fairly good controllers. So I'm gonna put all these aside because we have some controllers with this sort of design that a lot of people consider to be not so good. And the first up is the Wii U gamepad. One of the main complaints with this, it's too big. People think it's too big. Or some people do. I shouldn't say everybody. I don't think this is a bad controller. A lot of people do, but I don't think it is. Functionally, it's probably one of the best controllers ever made. It gives you access to your 4 face buttons, your 2 analog sticks, your D-pad, your start, select, your 4 shoulder buttons, and it even has a touchscreen. It actually has, I guess, the same amount of functionality as the PS4 controller. Well, the PS4 controller has analog triggers and a touchpad, and this is a touchscreen. I'm going to say this is a far more interesting controller. I think the touchscreen is far more fun than the touchpad. Anybody who's played Wind Waker HD can tell you that this thing can be fantastic when used right. But the problem was it wasn't a lot of the time. A lot of the time the touchscreen was either shoehorned in or just not used at all. In the case of like Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, the screen is just black. But again, if you want to argue that it's too big, I really don't think it is. Like, you have easy access to all your face controls. There's your start and select down here in your home, but those aren't functions that you really need to access as much or as quickly. And then your 4 shoulder buttons, it's kind of hard to show you, but like they're they're in good positions. I think the actual proper shoulders and not the triggers, which I'm calling shoulders because they aren't analog triggers like you do have on like a PS4 or Xbox 360 controller. But I guess bumpers is what most people would call them. The bumpers, I don't think are great. They're a little bit big and they kind of wrap onto the side in an awkward way. But I think this is a good controller, and in terms of ergonomics, simply because of the way the face buttons are a little closer together and not right on top of each other like the Switch is, I actually think in terms of ergonomics, the Wii U gamepad has it beat. And considering it's essentially just a big Fisher-Price tablet, the ergonomics are about as good as they possibly could have been. It's got these little sort of knobs, kind of ridges on the back as handles to give you more grip. So, as much as people don't like it, I think that's actually a decent controller. Get you out of the way for now. Another controller that people complain too big, that I'm going to show you in a sec, if I can. This is not exactly a formal process. It's just have a bunch of controllers on the floor. Is not this controller. This is the Xbox, or original Xbox. I can't say Xbox. Oh, it says right there. It says Xbox Controller S. This is the S model that they came out. It's, I guess, the second generation of controllers for the original Xbox, and what it was used for the majority of its lifespan. I think the Mark I, which, if you're familiar with the original Xbox, you should know what that is. It was only around for maybe a year or less. It wasn't out for very long. They had phased it out by the time I got my Xbox as a kid. This is a good controller. I'm not going to go into it too much right now, because I probably will end up talking about it a bit more later. But it's got the similar sort of functions that we were talking about earlier, with the exception as it doesn't have bumpers. Instead it has these black and white buttons, which for most games on the console and most games of the time wasn't really an issue. That worked fine. There's only maybe a couple games where I would say, man, I really wish I had bumpers right now. No, the controller that people think is too big is this, the Duke. And let me say, this controller is already a pretty beefy controller. Like, the PS4 is not like a tiny controller, but the Xbox controller is clearly a lot bigger. And then you have the Duke, which just dwarfs this thing. It is massive. It is... And I was defending the Wii U gamepad earlier, but this is just awful. Like, for example, I have to... If I'm resting, just in my normal playing position, I have to shift my hand all the way. I have to completely shift my hand and just hit the back button. And there's no reason for that. It could have easily been here, or here, or here, or here. The start button isn't as bad, but still, no matter which hand you want to use, you gotta completely shift it. Shifting from the right analog stick up to the black and white buttons is just... It's almost as bad, and these are small buttons for how large the controller is. They're not really that much bigger than the buttons on a Joy-Con, and this thing is tiny. I don't know what the hell they were thinking with this one. It's... I guess the one thing I gotta say is the analog sticks feel good. The buttons are small and oddly shaped and just weirdly positioned. The triggers are good, I guess. I mean, essentially it's the same build quality and everything feels the same as it did on the original Xbox S controller. But it's just, except for the D-pad, this, I don't know how well it's going to show up, but it's not clearly defined directions like it is on this one, or a Nintendo, like a Nintendo D-pad. it's just this weird mush. It's not good. It's big. It's horrible. I have no clue what the hell they were thinking with this one. So those are some controllers that people will say are too big. Now, there are also, you can go the opposite way and say there are controllers that are too small. And again, the Joy-Con. Wrong way. The Joy-Con. And they are too small, and they're not. For example, you can use it with just one, and it's horrible. It's awful. No matter which one you use, you're not really getting a super pleasant experience. All the buttons are tiny. It's just this cramped mess. But you're only going to be using it that way if you're doing the whole thing where you have your portable and you're out on the go and somebody says, hey, do you want to play Mario Kart? And you go, whoop. And then, you know, it's two separate controllers. So I could complain about this, but it's not really that issue because how often you're going to be using it, it's sort of your last resort controller, and you're probably not really going to be using it for more than like 10 minutes. You can also put the straps on there to give it a little bit more girth, and I forgot to bring those upstairs. And on top of that, you can just use them individually like Wii Remote and Nunchuck style. They are kind of small. I do think that the Wii Remote and Nunchuck are actually better ergonomically in that sense. Although these are motion controllers, and if I'm going to do a video on these, so that would be this, the PlayStation Move and the Kinect, that would be a completely separate video, just due to the nature of how they're designed differently. But these things are also motion controllers, but I haven't really had chance to use them as motion controllers at any length, just in Mario Odyssey sort of. But they do have the same sort of button layout, you know, your analog sticks, your face buttons, your shoulder buttons. They got those extra buttons on the side there, but that's for just individual mode. These are good. I like these like this. It took me some time to get used to playing a split Joy-Con. You probably won't like it at first just because they're really small and they're kind of foreign. There hasn't been a controller as small as this that you're supposed to use like this. But trust me, it's way better than using this crappy grip. This thing is just... See, before you could have your hands in any which way you want, and now you're stuck to this cramped little small... The issue is really these grips are just way too small. They're smaller than like a PS3, PS2 grip, and I already consider those borderline too small. So this is just not good. Play it individually, or shell out the cache for a Pro Controller, or just play it in handheld mode. Don't use the grip. Use split Joy-Con, use the Pro Controller, use handheld mode. Don't use the grip. So I've gone over controllers, the standard controllers. I've gone over controllers that are too small, controllers that are too big. But now we're going to go off of some other controllers that I think are interesting. And by that I just mean one controller. And that's the GameCube controller. I don't know why I said more controllers. That's the only one. Oh, okay. There's we'll leave the GameCube controller for later. We'll go with the Wii U Pro Controller. And most people think this is weird, mainly because the button placement is... it's the only controller like this, besides the gamepad, but I think just because that was kind of already a foreign entity in the video game controller world, people didn't really think about it too much. But it's the only of this standard layout Xbox 360 PlayStation style controller that has the face buttons below the right analog stick. And most people think it's weird and probably didn't like it at first, but it's fine actually. And if you're playing like a retro game, like you have the thumbs in the same symmetrical position, I kind of like it. Actually, in terms of ergonomics, I think it's one of the best controllers I've ever used, but there are a couple issues. It's very light. It doesn't have a gyro like the gamepad or the PS4 controller do. It's kind of feels a little bit cheap. Buttons feel a tad mushy and wiggly. The triggers are still just digital. They're not an analog trigger like the PS4 has. It's a good ergonomically it's a very good controller, but I just think the build quality isn't quite up to par. It has a monstrous battery life though. With something like this, I got this close to when I got my Wii U. I think a year after. I think I got my Wii U 2014. So I've had this thing for 4 years, and I've charged it maybe 4 or 5 times. Granted, it's the Wii U. I never used it much to begin with, because I did use the gamepad for a fair amount of games. Now the GameCube controller, everyone's favorite GameCube controller. This controller is great, and we'll get into that in a second. It's great. The buttons feel good. The triggers feel excellent. They got that satisfying, they come in and then Smash Bros. Players know that sound. It's the Smash Bros. Controller. That's why they brought it back for Smash Bros. Wii U. Everything about this controller feels good. The sticks are firm, have a good range of motion, except the D-pad. The D-pad sucks, but we'll get into that later. Every single button except the D-pad feels good on this controller. But this button layout, it works really good for first-party exclusive games that were designed with it in mind. So your Mario Sunshine, your Smash Brothers, your Wind Waker, they all work fine with this. Certain third-party games do not. Soul Calibur, and I know a lot of people love the GameCube Soul Calibur, or the Soul Calibur 2 on the GameCube as it has Link. I tell you, I played that. I played it once on the GameCube, and the Xbox version is the only way to go, just because this is not suited to the fighting games at all. For example, if I don't exactly remember where everything was mapped, but if this is block and this is horizontal attack, and these are your attacks, but then block is all the way over here, you're completely shifting your thumb just to hit one button, whereas for this, you essentially, from this one position, you can hit everything pretty well. You don't have to move your thumb that much. Hit X, hit square, triangle. You can hit everything easily. Same with, the Joy-Con and the PS4 controller, the 360 controller, everything that shares that sort of design. You can't say that for this. It's, like I said, it works fine, and it's kind of a minor gripe. But again, this thing's issues come from just third-party games. It doesn't have the same amount of inputs as either the PS2 controller or the original Xbox controller. They all have 4 face buttons, 2, I'm going to call them miscellaneous buttons because they were bumpers on the PS2, but 2 miscellaneous buttons, the D-pad, 2 analog sticks, start select, and stick clicks. The GameCube has 1 miscellaneous button, no stick clicks, only start, no select, and just an awful, tiny, fiddly D-pad, making it really not good for a whole lot of games. That's why when the glitch was discovered on the Switch, where you could plug in the GameCube adapter and use this, and people were super excited to use it on a lot of the Switch games, and I can't really understand why. It simply does not have the same functionality as you would get from using this. Sure, you might like the ergonomics of it, they're good, but it's simply not going to be able to play as many games with as much fidelity or sensical button mapping as this thing would, or any other controller for that matter. So while it's good, best controller of all time, like a lot of people, or a contender, like a lot of people want to make it out to be, not so much. So, that being said, what do I think are the best controllers ever made? Well, let me, this video is fucking long enough. I was going to do runner-ups, but I think our contenders are the DualShock 4, the Switch Pro controller, and this one might shock some people, the original Xbox controller. Now, let's go over these two because they're pretty obvious. They have all your standard features. Build quality is good. Buttons feel good. They both have a couple unique things. They both have gyroscope. This one has the HD rumble and amiibo sensor, and this one has the touchpad. They both have good D-pads. Everything about the controllers, from the weight to the build quality to the ergonomic design, all feels right on these controllers. I shouldn't really have to justify these decisions that much. The one that people are probably going to be surprised about is the original Xbox controller. And why do I pick this over the Xbox 360 or Xbox One controllers? And I'm just going to say, I don't have an Xbox One controller, and I've hardly ever used one, so I can't really give a good opinion on that one. But why do I pick it over the Xbox 360 controller? Especially since, and I will say one thing, the Xbox 360 has a clear edge in a lot of categories, and I will use it over this one. I would if I was given the choice for a lot of games, simply because it has the bumpers instead of the extra face buttons, which it just is better. I'm not going to explain that too much. It's better for a couple reasons, mostly because it balances out the index finger and thumb actions. That way, your face isn't overloaded. But the Xbox 360, I think, has some issues. One, the external battery pack just makes my fingers feel kind of cramped. That's not going to be an issue that the wired version has, but I don't have that one. Secondly, I just don't think the build quality is as good. The sticks feel kind of wiggly, and it feels lighter and kind of cheaper. Like, this thing's a tank. This thing, I would be worried if I threw it at the wall. It's beefier than some other controllers, but just not as good as this one. Secondly, the D-pad is miles better. It's a shield design, but has clearly defined directions. This one, they're kind of wide and mushy. It doesn't have the same click as this one. It doesn't feel as good. And some of it's simply just down to personal preference. I did grow up doing a lot of gaming on the original Xbox, so I'm going to have a bias. But I do genuinely think this is the nicer controller. For one, this is years older. This is one of the original Xbox controllers I had growing up. And the sticks don't wiggle around as much as the Xbox 360 ones do. It's generally in better shape despite being older and used more. So I think that says something about the build quality on these. And there's actually one more controller that I forgot. It's the N64 controller, and dang, people like to rail into that one, but I don't think it's so bad. But this video is too long, so I'm gonna just fucking end it now.